Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. Ever since UFC 293's main event was announced, which is Israel Adesanya versus Sean Strickland for the middleweight title, the MMA community has kind of been wondering, well, when will we see Israel Adesanya versus Dricus Du Plessis? This was the fight that was promised after UFC 290. This was the highly anticipated middleweight title fight between Adesanya and Du Plessis, the fight the fans want to see. And I hate to break it to you guys, but Israel Adesanya versus Dricus Du Plessis may never happen. I believe there is a real possibility, a substantial possibility, that that middleweight title fight never comes to fruition. And we're going to discuss it in this video. We're going to discuss some comments that Eugene Bareman, who is Israel Adesanya's coach, made about this fight, but that's not the primary point of this video. He got some heat for those comments. We'll discuss those, but we're also going to discuss, is Israel Adesanya ducking Du Plessis? Or also, people are saying Du Plessis is ducking Adesanya at UFC 293. And we're also going to discuss how I believe the UFC made a massive mistake here. But if you go back to a couple months before UFC 290, Dana White comes out and announces Robert Whittaker versus Dricus Du Plessis. And he announces it as a #1 contender fight in the middleweight division. And everyone started kind of thinking, okay, well, UFC 293, which was recently announced around that same timeline, was in early September, and Israel Adesanya said he's headlining that event. So you have a 2-month turnaround for whoever wins at UFC 290. Most fighters, bare minimum, like a 2-month training camp, if not a 3-month training camp. So how is that really going to work out? And we talked about it in the lead up to the fight. I thought there was a chance that Sean Strickland or Abus Magomedov, the winner of that fight, could get a title shot. I thought there was a chance if Paulo Costa versus Ikram Aliskerov happened at UFC 291, there was a chance they could slide in for a title shot. And you fast forward to UFC 290, Dricus Du Plessis goes out there and shocks the world and starches Robert Whittaker, TKOs him in the second round. They immediately trot in middleweight champion Israel Adesanya. They stare down. Du Plessis doesn't appear to take a whole lot of damage in that fight. They stare down in the center of the cage. They shout at each other. And then we're like, okay, we're getting Adesanya versus Du Plessis at UFC 293. There's no way this fight doesn't happen now. And then sure enough, a couple weeks later, Adesanya puts out a video on social media. He said, look, Du Plessis says he has a foot injury. He's turning down the fight for UFC 293. And Strickland, I'm now fighting Strickland. Now, recently it was made official that we were getting Adesanya versus Strickland as the main event of UFC 293. But for a while there, it was hinted at, but not official because of whatever issues it may have been. Strickland was having visa issues, whatever it may have been. But in my original reaction to that, I discussed, look, there's a chance that Du Plessis never fights for the title now. There's a real chance that he never fights for a title. And now that all this has kind of been drummed back up by Adesanya's coach, I wanted to make another video because I want to really discuss this in full detail of what could happen and basically the future of the middleweight division, because it felt like on the night of UFC 290, there's no way we're not getting Israel Adesanya versus Du Plessis. There's absolutely no way. And now Du Plessis turns it down. He has a foot injury. He says, I don't want to take the fight on short notice, basically. I'm injured. He hasn't spoke publicly, but that's basically what we've been hearing. Now, my thoughts on Du Plessis not taking this fight, there's some people saying he's ducking Adesanya. If I was him, I wouldn't take the fight either. If he feels like he's severely compromised enough to not take the fight, he shouldn't take the fight. I don't want fighters who are injured taking fights, especially when it's a massive opportunity. I think anyone pretending that Du Plessis is ducking Israel Adesanya, they are crazy. Obviously, Adesanya is going to talk some crap and say, oh, he's got a foot injury. You know, it's the same thing fighters do all the time. But in no way, shape, or form do I believe Du Plessis is ducking Israel Adesanya or scared of Israel Adesanya. Now, recently, Eugene Bareman did an interview where he said, look, Du Plessis is going back into the pool of fighters and he has to fight again and he may never get his title shot. And that's what happens when you turn down an opportunity to fight for the title. You go basically back into the pool and you're not guaranteed anything until the dotted line is signed. Now, I have not seen every clip of the Eugene Bareman interview, but what the majority of what he was saying was actually true. That it's not guaranteed until it's signed on the dotted line. And even then, you never know. It could still fall out. And I do agree with Eugene Bareman that Adesanya versus Du Plessis may never happen. Now, he also made some comments in there. And again, I've only seen clips. This is not the main topic of the video. he also made comments like basically Du Plessis should fight injured. I do not believe Du Plessis should fight injured. If he believes he is severely compromised, he should not take this fight. So if that's what he's implying, that, oh, he should just take it injured, I disagree with it 100%. But also what I will say is, people are criticizing Adesanya. Oh, he's constantly trying to get guys on short notice. I hear that common trope trotted out for Israel Adesanya. And I believe that's a bit incorrect. I believe it's partially true, but I do believe it's incorrect because what people don't take into account is how active Israel Adesanya is. Israel Adesanya is one of the most active champions in the UFC. And just his overall UFC career, he's either fought 2 or 3 times every single year since he's been in the UFC. That is craziness. That is crazy activeness. So I believe even though people are saying, oh, well, he's trying to get guys on short notice and get an advantage, maybe that's partially true. But I also think the factor is Israel Adesanya is just so active. So he's just constantly looking forward to the next challenge. He's constantly trying to sign on to fight. I mean, in 2022, he lost the title to Alex Pereira in November. And he said, look, I want an immediate rematch, and basically fought him 5 months later. So maybe 6 months, but either way, that's not a quick turnaround. But that just shows how active he is. When we have other champions who are fighting once a year half the time, Adesanya is super active. So therefore, you're going to run into some of these scheduling conflicts. Now, overall, I don't think it's Israel Adesanya's fault. I don't think it's Dricus Du Plessis' fault. I believe this is the UFC's fault. I believe the UFC should have told Adesanya, look, we're going to wait for Du Plessis. Whether that's early October, they could have booked an early October pay-per-view. Because think about it, the UFC 294 card in Abu Dhabi isn't till late in October, so they could have just had a smaller gap, and I know it would have kind of threw off their schedule a little bit, but just give them a couple more weeks, 3, 4, maybe another month, basically. Maybe have a pay-per-view. Maybe do 2 numbered events back-to-back. That's what they did a couple years ago for UFC 267 and UFC 268. They should have found a way to make this fight happen. They should have found a way to make Adesanya versus Du Plessis happen, because I think a lot of fans are disappointed. I'm personally disappointed. I don't care about Adesanya versus Strickland at all. Don't care about that fight whatsoever. Adesanya versus Du Plessis was the fight to make. And I think it's really, truly the UFC's fault, whatever they had to do. But I get it. In a way, they're going to cater to the champion rather than cater to a contender who knows? We haven't even heard the extent of the Du Plessis injury. Maybe he's going to be out for 4 months. Maybe he's going to be out for 2 months before he can even start training. So that kind of throws the timeline. Okay, he's not even fighting by the end of the year. So, okay, we got to get Adesanya a fight. We want him to headline this card in Australia. So I do kind of give the UFC a little bit of pass without having the full information. But another comparison that I've seen, and I do believe, okay, this comparison's partly true, but I think people are leaving out one big factor. I've seen people compare Adesanya versus Du Plessis and the whole kind of trying to get Du Plessis to turn around on short notice after a fight to the Aljamain Sterling versus Sean O'Malley quick turnaround, where Sterling is kind of being forced into a title defense by the UFC. And that's not the same thing for really one reason. There's a big difference between a contender getting an opportunity to fight for the title on relatively short notice, and there's a big difference between that and taking a champion who just fought a hard 5-round fight and saying, look, you have to fight 3 months later. You have to fight 3 months later. Now, I know the timing is a little bit different, 2 months to 3 months really, but I think there's a difference between forcing a champion to defend that quickly, otherwise you're going to make a interim belt, versus actually just kind of offering a contender a title fight. He can't take it. He turns it down. They give it to the next guy up, which happens to be Sean Strickland in this scenario. So I do believe it's a little bit of a different scenario here. But when it comes down to the UFC 293 main event, Adesanya versus Strickland, there's so many things that can happen with this fight. Now, me personally, my early prediction for this fight, I think Adesanya wins. I think he takes relatively little damage, and I think he probably gets a spectacular finish in this fight. But you never know. MMA is such a weird sport. Who would have thought at the end of the 4th round of Kamaru Usman versus Leon Edwards 2, who would have ever thought Leon Edwards is going to KO him in the last minute of the 5th round to win the fight? Nobody would have ever thought that. Anything can happen in MMA. And the first thing that could genuinely happen, Sean Strickland could get an upset. For all we know, Adesanya could break one of his toes John Jones style, and the fight could be called off. He could break one of his hands, break his wrist, have to call the fight off. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I hope that doesn't happen. But also, you never know. Strickland could catch him with a clean shot and put him to sleep. I know that's unlikely, but if Strickland wins this fight, a lot of people aren't going to be happy about it, because Israel Adesanya is getting an immediate rematch. I will guarantee you 100% Israel Adesanya, Sean Strickland too, if Sean Strickland is to win the middleweight title. Unless Adesanya is going to be out for a while, unless it's some catastrophic injury. So if Strickland wins at UFC 293, again, low probability, that's the least of the potential scenarios that could play out with Dricus not getting his title shot, then Adesanya is fighting Strickland a second time, immediate rematch. So that fight's not happening. Okay, so this fight's happening in September. A rematch is not happening till February, March, April of 2024. So then the rematch happens. Depending on how that plays out, there could be a trilogy. Let's say Adesanya wins his title back, just for a hypothetical scenario. He's still going to want to wait another 3-4 months. So is Dricus Du Plessis going to sit out for 14 months waiting for his title shot? I don't think so. He fought in July. I doubt he's going to want to wait till summer of 2024 for his title shot. Maybe he does. Maybe that doesn't happen. Maybe Adesanya goes out there. My early prediction happens. He goes out there, starts as Sean Strickland, relatively unscathed. Another thing that could happen, Israel Adesanya has been super active. It would not shock me if all of a sudden he says, I want some time off. I've been super active. I've been fighting 2-3 times a year, every year for the last few years. I want some time off. Let's say he says, look, I want to sit out for 9 to 10 months. That's not unheard of for champions to do that all the time. That's not an ideal scenario. That's not a scenario I want to see. But that's a possibility as well. So maybe when he returns, he fights Dricus Du Plessis. That would be an ideal scenario if he did sit out. That's what I would want. And just to clarify, because I know some people are going to somehow twist this video and end up in my comments complaining, I want Israel Adesanya versus Dricus Du Plessis no matter what. I believe that Du Plessis is the #1 contender in the middleweight division. He's on a 6-fight winning streak in the UFC. He starts Robert Whittaker, who's one of the best in the division. No buts, no ifs. I want Adesanya versus Du Plessis next. I don't even want the Strickland fight. So I don't want anyone to twist this around and saying, I'm saying don't give Du Plessis the title shot. But there's a chance Adesanya beats Strickland. He says, look, I'm going to take some time off. You don't think the UFC is going to cater to one of their biggest stars who has some of the best drawing power in the UFC, who's been super active for them? 100% they're going to be. So let's say Adesanya wins the fight and he wants to stay active, okay? Well, UFC 294 is a month later. And guess what's the co-main event on UFC 294? It's the middleweight debut of Khamzat Chimaev. We are getting Paulo Costa versus Khamzat Chimaev. And this is a massive fight for the UFC. Khamzat Chimaev is a budding star in the UFC, and he's making his UFC debut in the middleweight division, okay? He's been fighting at welterweight. His last fight, he missed weight. We've been waiting for the return of Khamzat Chimaev, who's already very popular with fans. If Khamzat Chimaev goes out there and mauls Paulo Costa and finishes Paulo Costa and even just beats him, honestly, it could be a controversial win for Khamzat Chimaev, but let's say Khamzat Chimaev gets it done. Who is a bigger draw? What's a bigger fight? I want you guys to comment down below. What is a bigger fight? Israel Adesanya versus Khamzat Chimaev for the middleweight title, or Israel Adesanya versus Dricus Du Plessis for the middleweight title? Because I'll give you my answer, and that is Adesanya versus Chimaev. Now that, again, I hate to reiterate this because I just discussed it. I'm not advocating for this. I am a strong believer in I want the people who have earned their title shots to get their title shots, okay? But what does the UFC frequently do? They give preferential treatment to fighters who they believe can draw more pay-per-view sales. Look at it. We're getting Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington because they think Colby Covington can sell an extra $50K because he gets some clicks on YouTube, okay? They're giving Sean O'Malley a title shot, which I don't have a problem with the Sean O'Malley title shot, but they believe Sean O'Malley's a star. They've shown preferential treatment to Conor McGregor in the past. And in MMA and in the UFC in particular, not only for the UFC and UFC president Dana White and all the UFC staff, but also for the fans as a whole, it's about what have you done lately. And if Khamzat Chimaev goes out there and gets a big win at UFC 294 over Paulo Costa, the fans and UFC president Dana White are going to be licking their chops at a potential Israel Adesanya versus Khamzat Chimaev fight. So if that fight's booked, I think that fight is one of the biggest fights the UFC can make in the next year or so. Like if you asked me any fights that could be made by the UFC, off the top of my head, that's top 3 biggest fights the UFC could potentially make. That's probably #1 on the list that excludes Conor McGregor. That's #1 on the list in my opinion. Israel Adesanya versus Khamzat Chimaev. Now again, I believe even if Khamzat wins that fight, Dricus Du Plessis is still the #1 contender. But you think the UFC is going to care about that? And also anybody listening to this video who's saying, no, I want Dricus to get the next title shot. I guarantee you might flip and change your mind. I'm not going to. I want to see Khamzat fight for the title if he gets a win over Costa. But at the end of the day, I believe Dricus has put in the work, has got this long win streak, has starched Robert Whittaker. I believe he deserves the next title shot. But that doesn't change reality. We don't always get what we want. The UFC would book Israel Adesanya versus Khamzat Chimaev. The earliest that would happen would be March, maybe UFC 300, because that would be a mega fight. Adesanya's already came out and said Khamzat may steal his title shot. Also, on top of that, Israel Adesanya obviously doesn't like Dricus. And we've seen fighters, particular Conor McGregor, who kind of try to pick and choose certain fights based on who they like and don't like. Conor McGregor is notorious, no pun intended, for kind of hoping guys suck up to him, and then they're like, oh, I'm going to give this guy a red panty night. He liked all the nice things Donald Cerrone was saying about him, so he gave him the fight. Michael Chandler's been basically brown-nosing him for 2 years. He gave Chandler the fight, which may not even happen now, but that's besides the point. Adesanya may say, look, Khamzat Chimaev's more popular. Khamzat Chimaev just got a credible win in the top 10 of the division. Khamzat Chimaev makes me more money. The UFC looks at Khamzat Chimaev. They say he's going to make us more money as well. This is a more lucrative fight. And they book Israel Adesanya versus Khamzat Chimaev. And in that case, doesn't happen until early 2024 at the soonest, at the earliest. So then what is Du Plessis going to sit out, wait till fall of next year for his next fight? No, he's going to have to take another fight. And that's not even, there's still more possibilities that I have to go through. Imagine this. So imagine Adesanya beats Strickland at UFC 293. Khamzat beats Paulo Costa at UFC 294 and gets the next title shot. And let's say it happens in March at UFC 300. Meanwhile, Du Plessis has a serious foot injury. He has to go undergo surgery. He can't return until summer of 2024 anyway. I'm just saying a hypothetical. And let's say Du Plessis says, I'm going to wait it out for my title shot. I'm going to wait it out till summer or fall of 2024 for my title shot. I'll sit out a whole year for the title shot if I have to. Well, guess what's also happening towards the end of this year? There is a light heavyweight title fight that's most likely going to be booked and announced soon, and it is going to be Yuri Prochazka versus Alex Pereira, okay? Now, imagine this scenario. Imagine Alex Pereira wins the belt. I believe Yuri Prochazka versus Alex Pereira will most likely be booked for UFC 296 in December. Imagine Alex Pereira wins the light heavyweight belt. You bet Israel Adesanya is going to have his eye on that double champ status. And I believe he will try to go up and capture that second belt. Now, he may wait because he may say, you know what? Khamzat Chimaev is a massive fight. Alex Pereira is a massive fight. I'll fight Khamzat first if he won. Or maybe he takes the Dricus fight and then waits to fight, Alex Pereira if he does win the belt. And that's a big if. Obviously, he has to win it. But you're telling me you don't think Israel Adesanya, who has said on numerous occasions he wants to be double champion. He already attempted to do it against Jan Blachowicz back at UFC 259. If Alex Pereira gets a hold of that light heavyweight title, he's just going to try to go up to light heavyweight and become a double champion. Now, that's kind of full of a bunch of buts and what ifs because Alex Pereira has to win the fight against Yuri Prochazka, which isn't guaranteed, but it's a 50-50 shot. And I guarantee Adesanya is going to want to go up. He just brutally KO'd this guy, 6 months ago at that point. Now he's not going to want to go up and attempt. This is his best opportunity to become double champ now. It's against a guy he's already beaten. It's a guy he's faced in kickboxing numerous times. It's a guy he's fought in the UFC numerous times. And he's beaten now in the UFC in their last fight. You don't think he's going to go up and try to capture that second belt? 100%. So there's so many different scenarios where Adesanya just doesn't fight Dricus Du Plessis next. And I'll tell you this right now. I believe the Adesanya-Khamzat fight is bigger than the Du Plessis fight. And the Adesanya versus Pereira, I guess, trilogy fight in MMA for the light heavyweight belt, those fights are just blow the Du Plessis fight out of the water. I mean, you're telling me people aren't going to be more interested in both of those matchups versus, who breathes more African air? There's people that care about it. But I'm saying the Adesanya-Chimaev fight, the Adesanya-Pereira 3 fight at light heavyweight for a title is much more compelling, I believe, overall, and draws more pay-per-view buys. And we've seen stuff like this happen before. And I came up with 2 examples to discuss in this video. You go back to Chris Weidman. He lost his belt against Luke Rockhold at UFC 194, okay? Immediately afterwards, Weidman was guaranteed an immediate rematch. He got injured. He pulled out against Luke Rockhold. He never fought for undisputed gold since. He never got that shot again. You go back and look at Tony Ferguson. Tony Ferguson won the interim lightweight title against Kevin Lee, okay? Then he was scheduled to fight Khabib for the undisputed title, which was really Tony's title, but they were elevating it at the time because they were stripping Conor McGregor. Nonetheless, Tony tears his ACL the week of the fight. Guess what? The UFC not only stripped him of his interim title, okay? They booked Khabib versus Conor McGregor later that year with Tony Ferguson as the co-main event. Tony Ferguson never fought for undisputed gold ever again. So this isn't unprecedented. This is not unprecedented. Dricus Du Plessis, by turning down this shot, may have turned down his opportunity to ever fight Israel Adesanya. Now, he may still fight for middleweight gold, because I do believe if Adesanya goes up to light heavyweight, they'll probably throw Du Plessis in an interim title fight, and they'll have that fighter waiting for when Adesanya potentially comes back down. But if Adesanya, let's say, beats Strickland, goes up and fights Pereira for the light heavyweight title and wins, there's a chance he could retire right then and there. He's done everything he could ever imagined in the sport. And I just think this is so disappointing, in my opinion, because you have this fight that they built this dumb storyline on, but forget about the storyline for a second. Look how active and dominant Israel Adesanya has been over the last few years. And I know he lost to Alex Pereira, but he was winning that fight. He avenged that loss. Look at the work that Du Plessis has been doing, and people have been doubting him nonstop, myself included. And look what he did to Robert Whittaker. And I believe over the last few years, minus Alex Pereira, Du Plessis is the biggest perceived threat to Adesanya in the last few years. You go through, again, subtracting the last two fights with Alex Pereira, Jared Cannonier. Nobody thought Jared Cannonier could win that fight against Adesanya, at least not going into that fight. Nobody thought Robert Whittaker had a chance in the rematch. Nobody thought Marvin Vettori had a chance. The Jan Blachowicz fight was at light heavyweight. Most people thought Adesanya was going to win that fight. The Paulo Costa fight, okay, people thought there was a chance, but most people were picking Adesanya. So I was really looking forward to Israel Adesanya versus Dricus Du Plessis, solely based on their skill sets and solely based on Du Plessis has worked his way up in the UFC. He's gone on this winning streak. He now fought Robert Whittaker, who everyone thought he was going to lose to earn his shot. And now, just based on circumstances and UFC decision-making, there's a good chance it never happens. Now, honestly, an ideal scenario, in my opinion, would be Adesanya beats Strickland, Khamzat beats Paulo Costa, Khamzat sits out for a little bit, maybe takes another fight, and early 2024, we get Israel Adesanya versus Dricus Du Plessis. I do believe there is a chance, and I'm clinging on to that chance. I want to live in a world where the number one contender, the person who's earned a title shot, gets that title shot. But I wanted to make a video discussing, because people are like, oh, the middleweight division's bland. There's not really a whole lot of contenders. How could Adesanya possibly not fight Du Plessis? There's a million options, and it really only takes one. It only takes one, because one more fight after Strickland equates to essentially a year of time after Du Plessis already sat out for 4-6 months. So a year and a half, basically. It piles up very quickly, and all it takes, I'm telling you right now, my official prediction for all this, if Khamzat Chimaev wins at UFC 294 against Paulo Costa, we will see Israel Adesanya versus Khamzat Chimaev, March of 2024, UFC 300 main event. That is my belief. Du Plessis has to go win another fight. He may win, he may lose. If he wins that fight, he's in a good position, but then who knows if Adesanya might want to go up. Now, maybe we see that fight again late 2024, but you never know in MMA. It changes so fast, and fans just so quickly forget. Even though there's some people right now are saying, no, I want Du Plessis to get the fight. If Chimaev goes out there and gets an impressive, dominant win over Paulo Costa, a lot of fans will change their mind. Public perception will change. And it's just going to be really unfortunate if we never get Israel Adesanya versus Dricus Du Plessis. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And thank you so much for watching.